for joining me. If you don't mind, I'll probably just try and project my voice as opposed to using the mic. So if anyone can't hear me, just sort of wave at me and I'll try and speak louder. So companion piece to this presentation, I'd encourage you to find that on the city's website. It basically details the City of Hamilton's efforts on brownfields from 2001 to the present time. So if you're looking for some additional reading, I encourage you to look that up. So I think it's important to sort of have a common understanding of what we are talking about when we're talking about brownfields. So I've put up here just the definition that I commonly refer to point people to when we're talking about brownfields. You can read it yourself, but basically it's abandoned, vacant, derelict, or underutilized commercial or industrial property where past actions have resulted in actual or perceived contamination and where there is an active potential for redevelopment. So you can find brownfields in communities all across Canada. They commonly take the form of former gas stations, former dry cleaners, and former industrial factories or plants. Those are the most common type of brownfield properties, and certainly Hamilton has its fair share of those. There's alternative definitions to this. The province has one in the provincial policy statement, which is something similar to this. But by and large, it all comes down to the same thing. They're derelict properties that may or may not be contaminated. Two things to note in this definition that I want to point out. Cities often had a hard time with the underutilized piece. And what exactly does that mean? Because what is underutilized to me may not necessarily be what is underutilized to you, and certainly might not be what is underutilized to a company that is actively using a piece of property for their operations. So trying to define that within this definition is often complicated. And we're making steps to address that I'll touch on further. And the second piece that specifically hits home here in Hamilton is the piece that speaks to the active potential for redevelopment. Again, we're facing a situation in Hamilton right now where there's a lot of property where there's unwilling sellers, and that's something that we're facing a lot of. So while there may be some vacant brownfield property, the fact is that the owners of the property just aren't willing to divest of them, and therefore they're not actually active, they don't have the active potential for redevelopment sort of as we speak. So those are just two key things that I want you to know when we're talking about brownfields. So further, I want to just explore the context with you. Brownfields are difficult because they're often hard to quantify. And what I mean by that is no one really has a great understanding of how many sites there are sort of in Canada, in the province, or in Hamilton. And a couple of points to that. The authors of the definition that I just referred to estimate that there's about 30,000 sites of brownfield sites in Canada. A professor at Queen's University in 2010 who wrote a book on brownfields estimates that there are between 30 to 100,000 in Canada. And more recently, in 2012, the Ontario Real Estate Association estimates that there's approximately 12,000 in Ontario alone. So you can see that these numbers are large, but really by and large they are estimates, and it's hard to quantify. One of the reasons it's hard to quantify is municipalities, the province themselves, are reluctant to take on inventories of their brownfield property due to perception issues and also liability and negative property values. When you start identifying pieces of property that are brownfields. So it really puts us in a catch-22 when we're trying to do this. Having said that, we did undertake an exercise in 2008 called the Historical Land Use Inventory. A consultant came on board with us that identified 1,386 properties within the urban boundary of the city of Hamilton that have potential for contamination based on previous land use. So again, this isn't to say that there's 1,400 individual brownfield properties in Hamilton. This was a study that says essentially there are these properties that have potential for contaminating activities based on their historical use. Another piece of sort of a number that came out of that study was the number 91, and the number 91 was the amount of properties that are vacant and true brownfields in the city of Hamilton. So vacant property, not necessarily any buildings or anything on it. And those 91 properties really became the target for the city of Hamilton to try and get something more productive on those lands because sitting as a vacant property. They're not generating any taxes to the city of Hamilton, and they're unproductive land use. So we really put in effort towards those 91 properties. Just further to that, drilling down further, there's only about 20 hectares, or roughly 50 acres of that, within sort of our older historical industrial area, or what we would refer to as our bayfront industrial area. So really, when we're talking about this, part of our communication is that you can drive by a lot of sites, but their active potential for redevelopment might not be there. And really, there just isn't a lot of vacant brownfield properties within the city of Hamilton. So sort of what I see moving forward with this is that we're trying to shift the conversation on brownfields. So actually, Chris Murray had done a great introduction, I thought, this morning. He really talked about a couple of pieces of legislation that I'll refer to here, which is places to grow, the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, the opportunity that brownfields play within these pieces of legislation. So basically, these pieces of legislation note that residential growth and employment growth is going to happen, and it is going to happen in the city of Hamilton. We can only expand so far in terms of our urban boundary. So a lot of this growth is going to come in terms of infield development. So this is really where brownfields play a key role for the city in the coming future, and they already have. As I mentioned, I think part of our job is sort of shifting the conversation or shifting the perceptions of what brownfields are in the city of Hamilton. Oftentimes, the word brownfield itself has negative connotations, and I think we want to get away from that to really emphasizing that these are lands of opportunities, and they do represent some real redevelopment potential to meet our growth targets, not only on the employment side, but on the residential side. I'll get to a couple pictures in a minute that will sort of hammer this point home. But I also want to stress that our physical legacy is certainly nothing to be ashamed of. And I think our office in particular, we look at the Bayfront industrial area as a real driver of the economy, not only in Hamilton, not only in Ontario, but in Canada for the past 100 years. And really, that's nothing to be ashamed of. In fact, that's something to be celebrated. And I think we need to do a better job of doing that. So sort of shifting the conversation away from the negatives to the more positive, to the opportunities that brownfields create. Again, this was one of the pictures I was referring to. We've had many conversations with people who don't know a great deal about Hamilton. All they know is when they drive over the Skyway Bridge from, say, Toronto to Niagara Falls. And this is the perception, or this is the image of the city of Hamilton that they see. And that's something that we deal with and we combat on a day-to-day basis. However, I would venture to say that most of us in the room, myself included, know Hamilton to be the best kept secret in Ontario. And certainly this is the side of Hamilton that a lot of people don't see, right? You see the smokestacks, they don't necessarily see this side of Hamilton. So again, it's about changing the conversation. So while there's opportunities, while there's many benefits to brownfield redevelopment, whether that's the location of where the brownfields are, the existing infrastructure, all that type of stuff, there's also many barriers that prevent brownfields from being realized to their full potential. And oftentimes, these barriers, in terms of the private sector, become a real obstacle to get these things moving. So generally speaking, I classify the barriers to brownfield redevelopment as to academia into four sort of points here. One being liability issue. I think that's probably the biggest issue. Two is time and uncertainty, so regulatory delay in terms of getting these properties remediated and redeveloped. Market conditions. I've always said that brownfields are really a matter of market condition, and if there's a market there to support the cost of remediation and redevelopment. And lastly is financial and cost issues. And that's certainly where the municipalities can play. So what are potential solutions to these barriers? How can we move past the barriers in order to realize the full potential of these sites? I'd say that the province of Ontario, through the Ministry of the Environment, has done a job in moving that yardstick forward. forward, and I see some of my colleagues in the environmental consulting world probably agree with me on that. They've done a job in addressing some of the barriers toward brownfield redevelopment in the province, most recently through a set of legislative reforms to Ontario Regulation 15304, which is the Brownfield Record of Site Condition Regulation. They've updated their science, so the standards in terms of what properties must be remediated to. They've updated that. They've implemented sort of new or time-saving features in terms of a risk assessment procedure. And they've taken some steps to address the liability issues. More specifically, that benefits municipalities and, say, a private property owner, but they are taking some steps. What they haven't done, and what I would argue, is that they still haven't come to the table with any true financial solutions to help move these properties along. And really, that's where the municipality has taken a role and will continue to take a role as we move forward. So the way that we've done that at the City of Hamilton is by what's called the ERACE program, or more effectively, the Environmental Remediation and Site Enhancement Community Improvement Plan. This is essentially a comprehensive set of programs, financial incentives that are geared towards the private sector to help offset costs of remediation or whatever they may be, to help put these lands back into productive lands. So we've had some great success with this program. In 2001, when this was first introduced, this was actually the first brownfield-specific community improvement plan within Canada. So we're really seen as a leader in terms of this area. And this map here basically shows the geographic area for which those financial incentives apply. So I refer to this as the historical industrial area of the City of Hamilton, Bayfront and East Hamilton industrial area. We undertook a process in 2005 to amend that. We found that brownfields aren't just an issue within that older industrial area. And as I mentioned before, they commonly come in the form of former gas stations, dry cleaners, that type of thing. And they're scattered throughout the urban area of the City of Hamilton. It's not just in the north end of Hamilton. So we undertook a process to expand that boundary to include the entire urban area of the City of Hamilton. So now our financial incentives apply within the entire urban area of the City of Hamilton, because that's where brownfields are. So I'll quickly just run through the financial incentives that we offer. There is a race study grant program. Basically, the city will grant 50% dollars to a maximum of $20,000 to a property owner or a potential property owner to conduct a phase 2 environmental site assessment. Essentially, this is an assessment that will quantify or dictate whether or not there is contamination on the property, so we get an understanding of that, and so does the property owner. The redevelopment grant program, which is the big program, essentially offsets the cost of remediation on a brownfield. And the way we do that is back through what's called a tax increment equivalent grant. So we provide essentially a tax rebate, a property tax rebate back to a property owner or developer who's undertaking remediation in a redevelopment project to help offset the costs of remediation on the project. The tax assistance program is essentially the same thing, it's just the way that we grant the money back is a little different. Instead of physically cutting a check back to the property owner or developer, we can freeze or cancel their property taxes, so they're not paying those during the development or during the remediation development phase. The next program, again, an award-winning program, Downtown West Hartford Remediation Loan Program. We're now offering low-interest loans, actual upfront money, at 80% of the cost of remediation to a maximum of $400,000 for owners and developers to redevelop properties in the downtown West Harbourfront area. And really what's unique about this program is that it's to act as a bridge until they get their tax grant that they would be applying for at the same time. So in essence, we're loaning them the money up front. They're assigning what they would get in the form of a tax grant back to the City of Hamilton to cover their loan. So they're not actually coming out of their pocket to pay off their loan. So it's really innovative. And we're the only municipality that we're aware of in Canada that offers this type of program. And the last one is just basically, it's a program where we can demonstrate municipal leadership in this area of brownfield redevelopment. We have funds that we can access as the city that can either partner with someone, say an institution, or we can demonstrate our own leadership on our own properties in the city. This map, again, this was taken from the report that I mentioned earlier, but it's basically a geographic representation of the successful applicants to our various programs. And really you can see they're scattered, again, as I mentioned, sort of throughout the urban area, so it's not concentrated on one area per se. It's reflective of what we're seeing across the board. And the red ones are sort of the redevelopment grant programs that have been completed, and the green ones are the study grants that we've done. And there's a couple of pictures there just to demonstrate some of the great projects that have happened with the city's assistance. So on that note, just want to take a bit of time to reflect on the successes that we have had in terms of Brownfield as a city. The least of which is we've run been nationally recognized 4 times with what's called Brownie Awards. And these are the industry awards that recognize leadership in brownfield redevelopment. So we've won 4 of those for various projects and various programs, the RACE program being one of them. And we're leading in terms of municipalities across Canada that won that too. We're considered a provincial leader in terms of brownfield redevelopment. This is based on a study which basically showed the average number of applications to our brownfield financial incentive programs across municipalities in Ontario. And we're by far and above the average in any other municipality in Ontario. As I mentioned, we're sort of the first in this game with our incentive programs, and also the loan program that I mentioned. And as a result of that, we're often looked as best practices to other municipalities within the province. People often call us with their issues, or how did you do this, how did you do that? And another testament to that is, as I mentioned, on those 91 sites that were identified in the historical land use inventory, we took a look in 2010, and at least 29 of those sites that originally popped up in 2008 were either consolidated, redeveloped, or in the process of redevelopment since that time. So recognizing it's a snapshot in time, we are making progress on some of these initiatives, and certainly some of these sites. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention what our colleagues are doing and our partners are doing on the brownfield redevelopment side as well. And I'd like to point out Brian Lenny here, who's from Horizon Utilities. They've just launched a new program themselves as of January 1st of this year, really tackling the issues of brownfield redevelopment on the utility side. It's a smart growth inspired connection policy that they came up with, and certainly Brian will do a better job of explaining it than I would, but from my understanding, they're promoting infill brownfield redevelopment, or companies that come in and take over abandoned buildings. And what they're doing is they're offsetting or waiving certain costs that would normally be applied to them to sort of get that factory back up and running. And again, that's sort of the Coles Notes version, but if you have any questions on that, I encourage you to speak to Brian. But it really demonstrates what our partners are doing on that end as well. So it's not just the city, this is a joint effort here. And also I'll mention what also other institutions in the city are doing. McMaster, for instance, building the McMaster Innovation Park on a 37-acre site in West Hamilton, as well as Hamilton Health Sciences. They've done some tremendous work on brownfield redevelopment for some of their buildings as well, too, the least of which is the David Braley Center. So there's a lot of good things happening, not just at the municipality, not just in the private sector, but with institutions as well. So having said that, and sort of this is what I'll bring home, there's definitely a recognition that we still have a lot to accomplish. So while we're seen as a leader, we still have a significant number of issues facing our community in terms of brownfields moving forward. So a few things that I want to highlight sort of in this is the city moving forward on a number of initiatives relative to brownfield. The first is the Bayfront Industrial Area Strategy. Our planning group, in concert with economic development, is undertaking a Bayfront industrial strategy that will look at sort of land uses, and will look at configuration of space down there, and what we need to prepare for in terms of deployment in the Bayfront industrial area in the future. There's a report coming forward on that in June, so you can basically scope out the work that we're undertaking this process should take roughly about 18 months, and at the end of it, we hope to be able to answer some questions that we've had some trouble answering before, which is the underutilized piece. What happens, for instance, if U.S. Steel decides to leave town? Some of those larger, bigger items that we haven't previously dealt with. The West Harbor lands are moving forward as well too. My colleague Chris Phillips in the Waterfront Office is doing a great job in moving Pier 7 and 8 forward. Urban design study will be done on that by the end of this year. And secondly, the Martin Tiffin area, which is the sort of second piece to the Waterfront Harbor lands that the city owns, is also moving forward with servicing strategy and urban design. And then eventually they'll be undertaking a study in terms of how to bring those lands to market. One of the things that we're struggling with currently is a very low industrial vacancy rate. The historical low industrial vacancy rate is about 1.9%, something like that, meaning that when we have companies calling that want to locate in Hamilton, we just physically don't have the space for them in terms of existing buildings. And this is based on third market sort of real estate market validation from Colliers. We just don't have the space for them. So we need to ensure that there's and this is what Chris Phillips calls a balanced land approach. So we need to have brownfield options, but we also need to have greenfield options for these companies when they come calling, because our biggest fear in economic development is that they're going to pass us by and go to the next community just because we don't have the space for them. So it's really a balanced approach. We're doing good things on the brownfield side we need to continue to do, but we also need to incorporate the greenfield piece as well too. I want to stress that brownfields are just one key component to urban renewal as a whole. And what I mean by that is there's other things that are ongoing simultaneously. We're hearing discussions about transit. We're hearing discussions about heritage preservation. We're hearing discussions about infrastructure renewal as a whole. All those things need to happen simultaneously to move this forward. The big question is, okay, how do we fund that? And that's something that we're going to have to come up with a strategy for. And the last thing I'll sort of touch on is that we can't go at this alone, and it's something that we continue, the message we continue to put forward to the province and the feds is that they need to come to the table financially, because municipalities can't go at this alone. And as I mentioned, they've done a good job on some aspects of it, liability, some of the regulations, but really they need to come to the table with some cold hard cash, as I say it. We're lagging way behind Europe and the US in terms of state or provincial and federal funding. The United States have funds and super funds at the state level, as well as loans at the federal level that just are non-existent here in Canada that you need to start considering to help remediate and develop some of these problems. So that's what I'll leave you with. And I don't think we're getting close to the time there.
Thank you very much.